For years, Jarrod Schulz was one of the faces viewers associated with Storage Wars. Standing beside Brandy Passanti, he became half of the show's young guns, a pair whose arguments, risky bids, and unlikely finds made them impossible to ignore. On television, Jarrod looked like the scrappy entrepreneur who could turn an abandoned locker into a paycheck. But behind that familiar image, his life was changing in ways viewers would eventually see only in fragments. Jarrod did not enter the storage auction world as a television celebrity. Before Storage Wars, he had worked in the mortgage industry and eventually moved into buying storage units full-time. He and Brandy operated the Now and then second-hand store in Orange, California, building the kind of small business partnership that fit perfectly into reality television. Two people with different personalities, limited resources, and a shared gamble every time the auctioneer opened a locker. Then Storage Wars arrived. The series premiered in December 2010, and Jarrod and Brandy quickly became recognizable personalities. Their appeal was not simply the possibility of finding valuable merchandise. It was the tension between them. Brandy often acted as the practical counterweight to Jarrod's willingness to chase a deal, while Jarrod seemed determined to prove that he belonged among more experienced buyers. The cameras turned storage auctions into a competition for money, pride, and reputation. Their television success also created new opportunities. A second Now and then location opened in Long Beach, but the business struggled. The Long Beach store was eventually closed, and the original Orange location shut down in 2016. Even while the retail side became more complicated, Jarrod's identity remained closely tied to Brandy and to the show. Although viewers had spent years watching them as a couple and business partners, Jarrod and Brandy had actually separated in November 2018. Instead, it surfaced on Storage Wars in the season 13 premiere, when their relationship was finally acknowledged as over. That detail changes the way the earlier episodes look. The arguments that once seemed like familiar reality TV friction now belonged to a relationship that was already breaking apart away from the cameras. And this is where Jarrod's story stops being simply a question of why a reality TV personality left a show. His disappearance came after years of visibility, a failed business expansion, the end of his partnership with Brandy, and eventually a serious legal controversy that would reshape how the public saw him. His public story unfolded in stages. First came the separation. Then came the decision to live and work separately from Brandy. Finally, in 2021, an incident involving the former couple led to Jarrod being arrested and charged with misdemeanor domestic violence battery. Jarrod denied the allegations. A&E did not publicly provide a detailed explanation for his departure, leaving viewers to connect the timeline for themselves. Meanwhile, Jarrod was building a life outside the auction cameras. In 2019, he took ownership of the Rush Bar and Grill in Lake Forest, California, giving him another business to focus on as his television career faded. The audience had watched Jarrod chase lockers, argue over bids, and build a business on camera. Now, the cameras were gone, but the disappearance was only the beginning. For a while, Jarrod Schulz seemed to have found the perfect formula. Storage Wars gave him a national audience, while the auctions supplied the unpredictable business opportunities that had attracted him long before cameras arrived. Alongside Brandy Passanti, he became one of the show's most recognizable personalities. Their nickname, the Young Guns, reflected how different they looked from some of the more established buyers. Jarrod was younger, aggressive, and willing to gamble on a locker when another bidder might walk away. A&E's own biography described him as a big risk-taker, someone who believed that taking chances could bring big rewards. But the success was more complicated than television made it appear. The couple's businesses were under pressure even while their television profiles were growing. Their second Now and then store in Long Beach was supposed to represent expansion, but the location struggled financially. By the time the series revealed that the store had not made a profit since opening, the image of the unstoppable young entrepreneurs had already begun to crack. The Long Beach location closed in 2014, and the original Orange store eventually closed in 2016. That mattered because Jarrod and Brandy were not simply co-workers. Their entire public identity had become connected. Viewers saw them argue over purchases, question each other's decisions, and then return to the next auction together. Their chemistry became part of the entertainment. In 2014, A&E even built a spin-off around their personal and professional lives, Brandy and Jarrod, married to the job. The title itself captured the illusion that audiences had accepted for years, that the two were essentially inseparable. In reality, their relationship was moving toward an ending that viewers would not fully understand until much later. Jarrod and Brandy eventually separated in November 2018, although the split was not publicly revealed on Storage Wars until the season 13 premiere. By then, the two were no longer the couple viewers remembered. They were continuing their lives separately and, eventually, appearing at auctions as independent bidders. The change was significant. Jarrod had spent years being presented as one half of a television partnership. Without Brandy beside him, his role suddenly looked different. The familiar arguments were gone. The shared business was gone. And the relationship that had helped define his public image was over. Yet Jarrod did not simply disappear overnight. His life was moving in another direction. In April 2019, he became the owner of the Rush Bar and Grill in Lake Forest, California, turning his attention toward the restaurant business. That move suggested that he was not necessarily finished with entrepreneurship. He was simply building something outside the storage auction world. Then came the development that would change the public conversation around him. In April 2021, Jarrod and Brandy encountered each other at a bar in Orange County. According to reports, an argument followed, and Jarrod was later arrested and charged with one count of misdemeanor domestic violence battery. The allegation was serious, but it is important to distinguish an accusation and charge from a conviction. Reports also said Jarrod denied the allegation and pleaded not guilty. For longtime viewers, the timing was impossible to ignore. The relationship had already ended. Jarrod had already stopped appearing regularly on Storage Wars. Now, a legal controversy involving his former partner was making headlines. And suddenly, the question was no longer simply where Jarrod had gone. It was why the man viewers once knew as the young gun never truly came back. The answer remained partly uncertain, because A&E never publicly explained his permanent absence in detail. By the time Jarrod Schulz appeared on Season 13 of Storage Wars, the version of his life that viewers remembered was already gone. He and Brandy Passani had separated in November 2018, more than 2 years before audiences finally learned the truth on television. Yet the cameras still captured them crossing paths at auctions, now bidding against each other instead of operating as the couple known as the Young Guns. That separation changed the meaning of everything. For years, Jarrod and Brandy had been presented as partners in business and in life. Their arguments were part of the show's personality, but underneath the familiar television dynamic was a relationship that had ended away from the cameras. Brandy continued with the series, while Jarrod's appearances became increasingly limited. By the end of that period, the question was no longer whether their partnership could be repaired. It was whether Jarrod still had a place on the show at all. Then came April 30th, 2021. According to reports, Jarrod and Brandy encountered each other at a bar in Lake Forest, California. An argument followed. Prosecutors later charged Jarrod with one count of misdemeanor domestic violence battery in connection with the incident. Reports alleged that he pushed Brandy during the confrontation, but Jarrod disputed that account. His attorney later said Jarrod denied pushing or making physical contact with her and wanted the case dismissed. That distinction matters. A criminal charge is an allegation, not proof of guilt. And in Jarrod's case, the public record became complicated by conflicting accounts of what happened inside the bar. TMZ reported that different witnesses described the encounter differently, including one account saying Jarrod did not push Brandy and another saying he was sitting on a bar stool. Jarrod pleaded not guilty. But regardless of what happened inside that room, the public consequences were immediate. The man audiences had known for more than a decade as Brandy's television partner was now at the center of a legal controversy involving the same person who had helped define his career. The timing was especially damaging because the breakup had only recently been revealed to the public. Suddenly, the separation, the changed appearances on Storage Wars, and Jarrod's growing absence seemed connected in the minds of viewers. There was another important development. Reports indicated that A&E investigated the situation. The network did not publicly explain that investigation or officially state that the legal controversy was the reason Jarrod stopped appearing on the show. That means one popular conclusion should remain exactly that, a conclusion based on timing and speculation, not a confirmed statement from the network. Still, the timing was difficult to overlook. Jarrod had been a regular presence since the show's beginning. After season 13, he was no longer part of the continuing cast, while Brandy remained involved. The contrast was striking. One half of the young guns continued bidding on storage units. The other had effectively disappeared from a franchise. And yet Jarrod's story did not end with television. Away from Storage Wars, he had another business to run. In April 2019, he had taken ownership of the Rush Bar and Grill in Lake Forest, California. The restaurant became part of a new chapter in his life, one that existed largely outside the reality TV spotlight. The transformation was almost complete. The television audience had known Jarrod as a risk-taking storage buyer chasing forgotten treasures. Now he was an entrepreneur living with the consequences of a public breakup, a controversial legal case, and a career whose ending had never been officially explained. The mystery was no longer simply where Jarrod went. It was whether the life he built after Storage Wars was actually the life he wanted, or simply the life left after the cameras stopped rolling. For Jarrod Schulz, the strange part was not simply that Storage Wars continued without him. It was how quickly the show moved forward. Jarrod had been there from the beginning, appearing across the first 13 seasons and helping create the identity of the series. Yet after season 13, his name disappeared from the regular cast, while Brandy Passanti continued. The show itself offered no dramatic farewell, no final episode explaining his future, and no definitive statement from A&E saying that one particular event caused his departure. That absence created a vacuum. And whenever a public figure disappears without a clear explanation, people naturally fill that vacuum with theories. Jarrod's 2021 legal controversy became the obvious focus. A&E reportedly investigated the domestic violence allegation at the time, but the network did not publicly confirm that the investigation directly caused his permanent exit. That distinction is important because the documented timeline is clearer than the conclusion many fans drew from it. Jarrod was charged, the network investigated, and his final season was season 13. Beyond that, the exact reasoning behind the network's decision has never been publicly established in a definitive statement. What is known is that Jarrod's television partnership with Brandy had already changed dramatically before the controversy. Their relationship ended in 2018, after years of being presented as a couple on screen. When season 13 premiered in 2021, viewers saw something that would once have seemed almost impossible. Jarrod and Brandy were now competing against one another. They were no longer the young guns working toward the same goal. They were former partners entering the same auctions separately. That change also exposed something reality television rarely shows clearly. A person can remain publicly recognizable long after the life that made them famous has disappeared. Jarrod's post-Storage Wars life, therefore, became less about television and more about business. He had already taken ownership of the Rush Bar and Grill in Lake Forest, California, in April 2019, nearly 2 years before the public learned about his breakup. The restaurant gave him a different kind of responsibility. There were no auction cameras, no bidding wars, and no storage locker whose contents could suddenly turn into a television moment. It was a conventional business requiring a different kind of persistence. That may be one of the biggest misunderstandings surrounding Jarrod's disappearance. Leaving Storage Wars did not necessarily mean he vanished from public life completely. Instead, the center of his life shifted. The man viewers remembered from A&E was now associated more with his own business than with the storage auction world. And while Brandy remained connected to Storage Wars, Jarrod largely stayed away from the franchise. The contrast became even more noticeable as the show continued into later seasons. Season 14 moved forward without him, and the series eventually reached a 16th season in 2025, with Brandy still part of the program. Jarrod, meanwhile, remained a former cast member rather than a returning buyer. For fans who had watched the original Young Guns from the beginning, that was difficult to reconcile. They had seen Jarrod and Brandy build a business, raise their children, argue over storage units, launch a spin-off, and become familiar faces in reality television. Then, almost quietly, that entire chapter ended. But perhaps the most revealing part of Jarrod's story is what happened after the fame stopped. There was no dramatic Hollywood comeback waiting for him. No major new reality series replaced Storage Wars. Instead, he continued with a quieter entrepreneurial life while remaining largely out of the spotlight. The public could speculate about what went wrong, but the available facts pointed to something more complicated than a single event. Jarrod had not simply lost a television show. He had lost the partnership, the business identity, and the on-screen world that had defined him for more than a decade. For years, the question surrounding Jarrod Schulz has been simple. What really happened to the man who once seemed inseparable from Storage Wars? The answer is less dramatic than some internet theories, but in many ways, it is more revealing. Jarrod did not simply vanish. His life changed through a series of events that gradually separated him from the television identity audiences had known since 2010. The first major change happened before his final season. Jarrod and Brandy Passani had already ended their relationship in November 2018, although viewers did not learn about the breakup until the season 13 premiere in April 2021. When they returned to the show, they were no longer a couple or business partners. They were former partners competing independently at auctions. Then came the April 30th, 2021 incident that permanently changed the public conversation around Jarrod. He was charged with misdemeanor domestic violence battery involving Brandy after an argument at an Orange County bar. Prosecutors alleged that he pushed her, while Jarrod denied making physical contact. His attorney said Jarrod wanted the case dismissed, and reports described conflicting witness accounts. Because of those conflicting accounts, the allegations should not be presented as an established fact of what happened. What is established is that the controversy arrived at the exact moment Jarrod's connection to Storage Wars was already changing. A&E investigated the incident, according to contemporary reporting, but the network did not publicly confirm that the legal controversy was the reason for his eventual departure. Jarrod's final regular season was season 13, while Brandy continued with the franchise. That distinction matters because it changes the story from a simple reality star was fired narrative into something more complicated. There is no definitive public statement from A&E explaining that one specific event ended Jarrod's career on Storage Wars. What viewers can see is the timeline. The relationship ended, the two returned separately, the legal controversy followed, and Jarrod did not return for season 14. The rest has largely been speculation. Outside television, Jarrod continued pursuing business. He had taken ownership of the Rush Bar and Grill in Lake Forest, California, in April 2019, before the 2021 controversy. More recent reporting has continued to identify the bar as part of his post-Storage Wars life. He also appears to have kept a much lower public profile than during his television years. And that may be the most important part of the story. Reality television creates the illusion that a person's life exists wherever the cameras are pointing. When those cameras disappear, viewers can mistake privacy for disappearance. Jarrod's absence from Storage Wars does not mean his entire life stopped. It means the audience stopped receiving regular access to it. The man who once built his identity around auctions, risky bids, and the Young Guns partnership with Brandy eventually became something different. A businessman whose most recognizable chapter was behind him. There was no confirmed secret Hollywood conspiracy. No official announcement revealed one hidden reason explaining everything. Instead, Jarrod's story was shaped by a relationship ending, businesses changing, a public legal controversy, and a television career that quietly moved on without him. That is what really happened after Storage Wars. Jarrod Schulz did not disappear because his past suddenly ceased to exist. He simply stopped being a regular character in the story audiences were watching. And perhaps that is why his absence still feels so strange. For more than a decade, viewers watched Jarrod chase forgotten treasures inside abandoned storage lockers. They watched him take risks, argue with Brandy, build businesses, and become recognizable to millions. Then the cameras moved on, leaving behind a man whose future could no longer be understood through a television edit. The young gun became a former reality star. The partner became an ex-partner. The television personality became a private businessman. And in the end, the biggest mystery was never where Jarrod went. It was how quickly a life that once seemed permanently connected to television could become something the cameras could no longer show. Which moment in Jarrod Schulz's journey surprised you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story gave you a different perspective on the man behind Storage Wars, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more untold celebrity stories.